Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and today we continue with the Commander 2016 upgrade series. A couple days ago, we did an upgrade video for Breed Lethality. Today we're going to look at Open Hostility, and of course, over the course of the next week, we'll hit the other three, make sure we include everybody. Now, if you saw that first video, then you kind of know what to expect here. We're going to look at 20 cards that would be some good upgrades. If you buy this deck, pull it out of the box, and you're looking for ways to make it more powerful right away, these are cards that will help get you there. As always, I would recommend use the cards that are fun for you. Don't try to shoehorn a bunch of cards in there just because you think they're going to be powerful. Commander's all about having a good time and having fun overall, and I think that's the most important thing. So hopefully some of these suggestions will at least point you in the right direction. I'm definitely not saying to try to shoehorn all these cards into the deck or anything like that. Use the ones that seem fun for you and are going to craft the deck to fit your play style. So having said that, let's get into the cards. I'm going to start off with Decimator of the Provinces. I like to find some recent cards whenever I can, and there's a few on this list. This is one of them. And this one actually probably could have been included in the Breed Lethality deck as well. In fact, it came up in the comments section as a good inclusion. I definitely agree with that. So you could use it there, but you can definitely use it here too. So this particular deck I had a couple concerns with. One of the concerns was that I felt it was a little fragile to things like board sweeps. There weren't a lot of deterrents to keep people from attacking if you do stumble. Secondly, and what this card addresses, I wanted to make sure when I do have a lot of my creatures and I'm going wide and I finally get to pump them all up, that they're able to do their damage. And trample is a great way to make sure that damage can get across. So this is just one of the cards I've added that's going to increase your chances of getting an opportunity to trample over your opponents. And I think that's a pretty big deal for this card. Also, yes, this isn't as big as another card we're going to see later in the list. However, giving all your creatures +2/+2 and trample, plus it's a 7/7 trampler by itself, is actually pretty awesome. Even if this gets countered, that effect still occurs. That's a big deal. And you have an emerge cost to play around with too, which means you can get it out a little bit earlier than maybe some other cards that are more powerful. So I do find that actually very intriguing for this particular deck. So I do think this could be very strong here. Next we have Darien, King of Kelcher. And this one comes from Cold Snap. I mean, whenever I have the opportunity to dig something out of Cold Snap and play with it, I try to do it. Cold Snap is one of my favorite sets, so maybe that's why I'm leaning towards this card a little bit, but here's what I like about it. It kind of addresses what I mentioned a few minutes ago, and the fact that if I do stumble, this at least is a deterrent that's going to make people think twice about attacking me, and I do think this deck needs a little more of that. If somebody does attack me, wonderful. I get some white soldier tokens, which is going to help me build back faster, and I'll just deal with that hopefully. But if they see this on the board, there's a good chance they might just go and attack somebody else. Also, as a side note, if you wanted to convert this from like a Sapperling-based deck to a Soldier-based deck, you could do that. I mean, it would take a lot more changes than you're going to see here today, but there's definitely a high power level associated sometimes with Soldiers and some of the synergies there, as well as just having white token creatures with cards like Hand of Justice or something like that. So just something to think about as a side note. Now, here's one of the big ones, Elesh Norn Grand Cenobite. Now, this one's a little more expensive. For the most part, on this list, I try to go as budget as I can, but I'm always going to throw in a couple of the more expensive cards. This is one of them. Now, this one's about $20, $25 for the most part, but if you can work this in your deck, maybe you already have it in your collection, hopefully, but you pay 7 for a 4/7 vigilance, and oh, by the way, all your creatures get +2/+2 other than this one, and also creatures your opponent controls get -2/-2. Phenomenal when you're attacking in with trample. This card is going to do a ton of work in this deck. Drawn a Liberator of Malachor. Now, here's another one of the more recent cards, a lot easier to find, a lot cheaper. Now, of course, it's not as big as the previous card, but I like what this does in this deck, and I've set up, and you're going to see in a few moments, a few other upgrades that give you a chance at an extra combat phase on your turn. This card really shines in that situation. If you're able to attack in with this and a bunch of even Sapperling tokens, give them all +1/+1, and then have a second combat phase and do it again, that's actually pretty devastating. And the fact that this can go ahead and just give a permanent buff to everything it attacks with is actually pretty awesome here. Next we have Heartless Haitsugu. Now this one's a high risk, high reward card. This one's maybe not for everybody, but the reason I like it here is because the whole idea of this deck is you're going to be able to do damage greater and faster than your opponents. So having a symmetrical effect that's going to take down everyone's life totals is a nice way to set that up. And if your deck's working the way you want it to work, you set up with this card and then you start taking out opponents with your trample creatures and maybe your second combat phases. And I do think this could be quite strong. Like I said, there is a level of risk. You start also hitting your own life total down. Who knows what could happen, right? But at the same time, I think the reward's good enough. Maybe not for everybody. It's a little bit of a gamble at times, but I do think it could be good here. Legion Loyalist, another way to give your creatures trample, basically is why it's here. What's nice is it's cheap, and it just costs a red, and you get a 1/1 haste creature. It's a huge surprise, right? So you play this, an opponent that maybe thought they were safe because they had some chump blockers or something, all of a sudden isn't safe anymore. And this is a pretty big deal. You can do it very quickly on the battlefield. Greater Hooth Behemoth. So I was alluding to this one a little bit earlier, of course. This one is a huge powerhouse. I mean, it costs you a little bit to play it, but if you can do this, you're pretty much almost guaranteed to take out at least one opponent, if not more. Very, very powerful card. Next, we have Ilia Eternal Pilgrim. Here's the thing with this card. For this to really be effective, you are going to have to gain some life. Out of the box, this deck doesn't really do that super well or anything. So you will want to bolster this card with some life gain, and I do have some options coming up on the list. But if you do go that route and you decide that's something you want to do, this is very good for you because it's going to deal with a lot of different threats. You can deal with non-land permanents. So this is planeswalkers, this is enchantments, this is other creatures, of course. It can deal with a lot of problems that are going to hit you, artifacts even. So it's very versatile. It's going to be able to handle a plethora of issues that you could run into, and this deck isn't super great at that. It does have some removal. As a matter of fact, it has some removal that gives you tokens, which is really cool for this concept. But this is a way to hopefully catch all and deal with some of those unexpected problems or problems above and beyond the first few you run into. So I do think this can be very good. Again, not for every build. You do want to enhance this with some life gain to make sure you can get the full effect out of this. You don't want to just rely on her first ability to get your life total up. Counsel of Allocation. So here's an example of a way to bolster with a little bit of life gain. I do like this card a lot from Kaladesh. I wanted to try to find at least one Kaladesh card, and I thought this was a really good one. As the game goes on, you're able to drain life from your opponents for every non-creature spell that they play. And in conjunction with Ilia, I think this card makes a lot of sense. All right, here's another one of the big ones. Irelia the Warrior. This is key. If I could only choose one card to slide into this deck, this would be the card. This is perfect for what this deck's trying to do. First off, Flying, Vigilance, Haste, that's always good. But most importantly, when she attacks for the first time each turn, untap all creatures you control, and then you'll have an additional combat phase. Now, here's the thing. There's two ways you can look at this. You can build up your army, give it trample, go in, potentially take out an opponent, untap, take out another opponent. That's very possible with this card. Another thing that's very possible, and here's what I really like about it, I can go ahead, attack in, take out an opponent, go to my next, untap everything, go to my next combat phase, and don't attack. And now I don't have to worry about the crackback. That's huge, because I think that's the biggest weakness this deck has, is having to worry about crackback. You just hold your huge creatures with trample back because you can't take out the whole board at once, and meanwhile someone comes along with a Damnation or Wrath of God, right? And then where did you get to? Nowhere. This helps you get around that type of situation. You can now take players out of the game and still be able to protect yourself. That is huge, and you're going to see some other cards too on the list that will give you a second combat phase, which will do the same thing. Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight. Here's maybe my second favorite card on the list. If I were only to put 2 or 3 cards in, it would probably be this one, the last one, and Elish Norn, quite honestly. This is huge. 5/5 flying, first strike, and most importantly, if a source would deal damage to an opponent or permanent opponent controls, the source deals double that damage. And on the flip side, if a source would deal damage to you or permanent you control, it does half that damage. That is gigantic for this deck. Another way to help protect yourself. And at the same time, what's really cool is this isn't just damage that you're doing to players or their permanents. This is damage that any opponent is receiving. So an opponent's attacking another opponent, they're doing the double damage. It's huge. But if they turn around and try to attack you, then they're not doing as much. And again, this also works as a deterrent if you stumble to keep you safe. But Behemoths, This is another card I really like in this build, actually. 6/7 Trampler, so there you go with the trample. But maybe more importantly, when it deals combat damage to a player, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So just another way to buff your team, which is really awesome, especially if you do get a couple combat steps. This can start to add up, which is really, really nice. Here's the other Borborgamos. This is the unraged version. This one's not as exciting to me as the previous one, but I still included it because it gives you a little bit of versatility in your deck. This is going to allow you to attack in. I mean, it's still a big old creature with trample, which is phenomenal. You'll be happy to play it. But you get to dig for some lands, but then you can discard those lands to deal 3 damage to a creature or player. It's something that this deck really doesn't do, so I just kind of threw it in there because I thought it might be an interesting answer to some problems. Rurik Thar the Unbowed from Dragon's Maze, perhaps one of the most commander-friendly sets we've ever seen, quite honestly. A lot of folks don't really like Dragon's Maze, but I think for commander players, there's a lot of awesome stuff in there. And okay, maybe for competitive modern players or something like that, it's not as exciting, but you can actually pick up boxes of Dragon's Maze pretty cheap to this day. So if you are a big commander fan, you may want to look at that and look at that set a little closer. But anyway, having said that, this card in particular, I mean, not much to say about this one. Now, it doesn't have trample or anything, but I thought it was an interesting include for its ability that it does punish anyone for playing non-creature spells. Now, it does include yourself, and you do have some non-creature spells in this deck, but you are very creature heavy, so hopefully the thought being that it will hurt you less than it will hurt others. Again, it's going to depend on what direction you go with this deck, if this is something you really want to include, but I just put it in here as an option. Gahiji Honored One. This is actually from Commander 2013, I believe it was. And this is perfect in this deck. I really like what this does. I mean, whenever a creature attacks one of your opponents or a planeswalker an opponent controls, that creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Again, not just when you attack, but if an opponent attacks another opponent, it gets this effect. And if they attack you, they don't get the effect. So again, it's encouraging people to attack each other and not yourself. Another thing that I thought was a little light in this deck out of the box. Alright, let's move out of creatures into some other spells with Soren's Solemn Visitor. This is the Planeswalker I included, and you could go a lot of directions with Planeswalkers, and there's probably a million things you can think of, a lot of good ones out there. But the reason I went with this is because it's a life gain enabler for cards like Ilia, which we talked about earlier. And this is awesome because he can buff your team with a +0/+0, but also gives them lifelink into your next turn. So even if you're just defending yourself, you're still gaining life. Again, it's a deterrent to make people think twice about attacking you because of the life you could potentially be gaining. It's just doing everything you kind of want to do with this deck. The -2 ability also makes tokens with flying, which is very nice as well. And the ultimate's fine too. It's just going to work just fine for you. But I really like those first 2 abilities. Just completely make sense with this deck. Aggravated Assault. This is the first enchantment, and basically this is just another way to get an additional combat phase. So talked about this at length earlier, so I won't go into too much detail. But of course, this is very, very good for this deck. Gratuitous Violence. This was actually just reprinted in Conspiracy Take the Crown, but here's the original Onslaught version. And this is nice too because it's not symmetrical. If a creature you control would deal damage to a creature or player, it deals double that damage instead, which is pretty fantastic, actually. You don't have to worry about a blanket effect. There are cards that do this for everybody. This one is just going to work for your things. Now, it costs a little more, but at the same time, it's very strong. Next, we have Sunstone. So I'm going a little deep here, back to Ice Age. And this is a pretty cheap card, very affordable. Maybe I'm just really fixated today for some reason on Ice Age and Cold Snap. I don't know. But the reason I went with this card was I wanted to find some fog effects that were reusable. I didn't want to fill the deck with a bunch of like instant fog effects. And I didn't want a reusable fog effect that was going to make you sacrifice a creature, which you can find a lot of those out there, because I just think the creatures are just too powerful. But I thought the fog effects were important because it does allow you to be protected from crackback. So this card was one that came to mind. Now, here's the deal with it, though. You do have to really think about your deck construction if you do want to go this route, because, of course, you will have to take out your basic lands, replace them with snow-covered lands. Secondly, now all of a sudden you have to do the math about, okay, does it make sense to try to shoe in a couple more snow-covered lands just because of this card? And does that mean taking out some of my mana-fixing lands or color-fixing lands? And if that's the case, at what point is that too much and I'm going to start having color trouble. So there is a little bit of thought you're going to have to do if you do decide to go this route, but I thought it was interesting. I just at least wanted to throw it out there as an option. And finally, our last card of the day is a sorcery. It's Overrun. And I mentioned this also in the Breed Lethality deck. It's just another way to give everything trample and buff your team. This can be a very, very powerful spell at the right time. Having said that, those are my thoughts anyway. Now, just like with the last video, I mean, there's a million different ways you can go. I mean, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of Magic cards. So let me know in the comments your thoughts, things that I didn't include that you think would be a great idea, or maybe things you've already even tried out. That would be really awesome to hear. So let me know ways that you would upgrade this deck, or maybe have already upgraded this deck. I'd love to hear that stuff. So as always, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.